No!
Hello and welcome to number 15 Usher's Island. This is the house made famous by James Joyce in his short story The Dead, which is the last short story in the brilliant volume called Dubliners. This house, number 15 Usher's Island, is a dark, gaunt house in which Joyce's aunts lived at the very end of the 19th century. Here, Joyce set the scene for the dinner party, the Feast of the Epiphany, that took place here on the 6th of January 1904. Of course, an entirely fictional meal, but based on annual dinner parties that the Joyce family would have had in this house. The house is believed to be 1760, although more recent research would hint it at being maybe 1720. But we know the foundations are a much older structure and are likely, but not yet proved, to be connected with a 13th century school of philosophy that was run by the Dominicans on this island in Usher's Island. I first came to this house on the 16th of June 1979 as a student, and at the time I'd never read Joyce. I had no interest in him, and I was very much on the fringe of a small group of people. Somebody knew somebody who could get the loan of a key, and with that we came into what was then a semi-derelict building, but strangely, coming down the stairs on the second step on the return from the window, I had my own epiphany that I felt that one day I'd own the house and restore it. And it was as simple as that. I was comfortable with that idea, and 21 years later, I met a man at a funeral who knew a man who owned the house, and with a handshake, my dream was fulfilled. But what you will see today is somewhat different from what was to be seen in 2000 when I actually acquired the house. The rates that were charged, local taxes by the local authority, were such that people could no longer afford to pay them. So to save paying the taxes, roofs and upper floors were removed from older buildings. So when I acquired this house, it had in fact no roof, it had no upper floor, and rain cascaded down the maid stairs that Lily would have climbed to go to bed every evening. The back wall of the house on my left had a very pronounced bow and was literally about to blow, and had it gone, the entire house would have imploded. And we reckon that there was about 3 weeks left before that went. So what we had to do was to shore up the entire house internally and then remove the back wall brick by brick, salvage the bricks, and then we went down to establish a foundation by hand-driven piles. We went a further 21 feet below the house, which is maybe 60 feet below the current road level, to get resistance for the piles in what is the firm ground of Usher's Island. And then and only then we began to rebuild. So the house had been burnt out. There was 20 people living rough here, and on the floor that I'm standing on now, we collected some 2 bucketfuls of syringes, heroin syringes. And again, in its own way, that simply maps the decline of the city of Dublin and the people of Dublin. So in the first events that we had, we used to serve wine in jam jars, the jam jar being the utensil, the poor man's china that was ubiquitous throughout Dublin at that time. So it's a very tactile, very tangible history that you will experience in this house, and the connections go all around the world. On another occasion, we had a wake for Ned Kelly from Australia, and it was a random act where we had Ned Kelly's death mask, and subsequently we had his rifle and the Jerilderie letter. But through that experience, we learned that Ned Kelly murdered or killed, depending on your position in history, a policeman by the name of Kennedy. That Sergeant Kennedy, in fact, had been a foot policeman whose patrol led him to protect this very house we're standing in today, and yet he ends up in the other end of the world being killed by Ned Kelly, and without knowing that, we end up hosting a Ned Kelly exhibition called Ned at the Dead. The Wellington Monument reflects all the battles he fought, which is within view of the house in Phoenix Park. But what is not known is that Wellington, as a young officer, Wesley, was part of an attack in India on various cities when they were trying to conquer India. But if we come forward to 1803, to Robert Emmet, an Irish Republican patriot, Robert Emmet's resurrection literally commenced in the back lane of number 15 Usher's Island, was doomed to failure before it began, but that's what the Irish are good at, the triumph of failure. But he never got to use the artillery technology that he actually possessed. And what had actually happened was when the British Army, in a mopping up operation after that failed rebellion, came into this area, they discovered technology, artillery, ordnance, which was way beyond their comprehension and was about 2 generations ahead of what the English army actually had. But Robert Emmet had obtained that artillery technology from Napoleon, and Napoleon had obtained it from Sultan Tipu of Mysore in India, who died defending his city against an attack led by, amongst others, Wellington as a young officer. So again, in a different period, in a different part of our history, this is the epicenter of all those stories. And I've no doubt you're going to have a lot more to share with us, so come on in and tell us your own stories.